So, I have had my Janus Halcyon 250 for over a year now, and I put over 10,000 miles on it in that year. So it's about due for a long-term owner's review. So I figured what I'd do is just come out here, sit down, bring a drink, got my iPad for notes, and we'll just discuss what it's been like to own that thing for a year. And mainly we're going to talk about just what sucks about that bike. Instead of sitting here talking about how much I love it or anything like that, we're talking about the reasons people give as to why they wouldn't buy one and the downsides of certain things of that bike. I actually view them as positives and plus sides, and have changed my mind on things, and just the way I think about things has made owning that for the amount of time I have now, which is a year, and it just made that year one of the most enjoyable that I've had in motorcycling. Because let's face it, this bike sucks. On paper, anyways. Because by every measurable metric, this bike loses to just about anything else out there, besides maybe weight. So how can it be any good? And that's because this bike actually shines in ways that you can't measure. You can't put it on a spec sheet. You know, so a lot of the things that people dislike about the bike are the things that I love about the bike. So from my perspective, yeah, it sucks. But it sucks in a good way. And also, having a bike that sucks was actually part of my plan. Because this was a strategic purchase as opposed to a what bike next purchase. I had some things going on in the back of my mind as to why I would buy this, something like this, versus anything else. And I recognize that people buy these a lot based on how they look. And that wasn't my case, but I don't think there's really anything wrong with that necessarily. But that doing something like that can lead to people buying the wrong bike that doesn't fit their needs or purposes and things like that. So yeah, there have been plenty of people that have bought them and gotten rid of them, things like that, because they bought the wrong bike, from the get-go. But on the other hand, when I first saw a picture of one of these, I dismissed the bike just out of hand. Because I'd seen this movie before, or so I thought. Because we've all seen, bikes that we're like, see pictures and we're like, oh, that's kind of cool looking. Then you realize that it's, some fly-by-night company importing, basically crap and trying to sell it as some retro item or something like that. And so I had kind of mistakenly written these off when I first saw them and never really gave them a chance. So when I started looking to add another bike to my stable, I was looking for a small, lower powered bike that's just lightweight for me to putt around on or take on trips if I want to, do whatever. And the process I went through when I bought my Continental GT was me sitting down and really thinking, over the last 50 years of riding motorcycles, what was the best and most enjoyable bikes that I owned, and try to buy something along those lines. And that's how I arrived at the GT. And I absolutely love that bike. I still own it, still love it. Just happen to end up riding this one more now. Not that I like that bike any less than I did. It's just this bike has kind of moved into my daily rider status, where the GT is kind of my wipe it down and ride it on Sundays, sporty bike. Kind of like my retirement sports car. And when it comes to buying a vehicle, whether it be a bike or a car, I'm pretty frugal because I hate to spend money on depreciating expenses, if that makes any sense. So I try to get, as much value out of the item as I can. And I also have actually some rules. I won't pay more than $10,000 for a car or a motorcycle. Just won't do it. I also won't finance anything. If I don't have enough cash to buy it, I simply can't afford it. That's just the way I look at it. So I had a $10,000 limit that I could spend if I wanted to. Didn't want to spend that much money, but that was my limit. And so I had to start thinking about, what do I want out of this little bike? And I started thinking about things, because I started riding motorcycles back in the 1970s. And I'm looking for something that will last me several decades. And so I started thinking, if I could travel back in time and buy something from the 1970s and bring it to today's time, could I ride that in today's world and make it last several decades? And the answer is, most likely I could, because I don't see any reason why I couldn't. And so that's what I started looking for, was something with 70s level technology, carburetors. I wanted a single cylinder over multi-cylinders. I wanted to have a Kickstarter on the bike. It had to be of all metal construction. So if a bike didn't meet those requirements, if it didn't have a carburetor, all metal construction, and a Kickstarter, just those three things eliminated most other bikes from my list. So if you ever wonder why I didn't buy insert bike here, that's why. If it doesn't have those three things, I wasn't looking at it. I'm still not interested in whatever bike that is, because it does not have what I wanted. And so that's where I started from, was starting to find bikes with 70s level technology, Kickstarter, all metal construction, all that. And that eliminated most bikes on the market from my list. You should be amazed how few bikes actually meet that criteria. And a couple of other things that I had in mind was I wanted as little or no plastic on the bike as I could get, and the same with electronic items. Because, like I said, having driven cars and motorcycles and things for 50 years now, I know there's two things that don't age well, and that's plastic and electronics. So I wanted to go as analog as possible and all metal construction as possible to help ensure that the bike has a long lifespan. Because, like I said, I've been riding for 50 years now, so that means I've got more years behind me than I have ahead of me. And so I'm trying to make it count, and I don't want to be buying motorcycles for the rest of my life. I'd like to have one that could grow old alongside me, as part of the journey. And so looking for a bike that met those requirements, believe it or not, the first bike was actually a Janus. Not that one. It was the Janus Griffin. That was the bike I should have bought, according to my list. And I was interested in it, and I really started digging into it, looking at it and everything. But then I thought about all the dual sports and dirt bikes and things that I've had in the past, and I just didn't think me and that seat would get along very well. And that's the only seat option they have for that bike. And there's no aftermarket, because it's such a niche item that there's no aftermarket seats for that. So I figured me and that seat wouldn't get along. But one of the seats available for this bike reminded me a lot of the Brooks saddle that I use on my bicycles. And I really like that seat. So I figured, well, maybe I could move to this bike, get the wide line seat, and me and that seat would get along just fine. So that's what brought the Halcyon 250 up to the top of my list. And that's why I ended up buying this bike. So let's talk about what sucks about this bike, and why that makes this a bike I absolutely love, and why those are the things I love about this bike. Oh, it's a slow bike. Yes, it is. And I did that on purpose. Like I said, I wanted something, to ride, at 60 miles an hour and below. So I'm not looking to go on the interstate or anything like that. I just wanted something to slow me down and just make me take the time to smell the roses. Because smelling the roses faster doesn't make any sense.
Don't you want to look at the Grand Canyon?
And the lower speeds takes interstate riding off the table, in my opinion. I know some people take these on the interstate, but I don't. And I tend not to ride on the interstate no matter what bike I'm on, because I can't think of a worse place I'd rather be. So what that does is force me onto back roads and side roads, and I spend a lot of time studying maps, looking for different routes and things like that, because it's kind of almost opened up another world to me, where if you look at a map and you see all the lines and everything, I'm in the spaces between those lines a lot of the times. Just out exploring and discovering things, and just having an absolute blast doing so. Now that said, however, I have had a lot of small bikes and scooters and things like that, so I know 14 horsepower, like what the stock Halcyon 250 has, just wouldn't be enough for what I was really looking for, because I do need the bike to maintain 55 to 60 miles an hour, no matter the road conditions. So if there's an incline, I need to be able to do 60 miles an hour up that, so I'm not an impediment to traffic, and that can actually be dangerous. I don't want anybody rear-ending me because I can't keep up with the speed limit.
It's surprised up there, Jesus. We're hitting 57, 55. 55 from the GPS. Not too bad. Up here on the little Janus. It's a little 250.
So I did solve that problem with the Motocult Stage 4 Performance Kit. That brings the bike up to 20 horsepower, and now I can do the speed limit pretty much anywhere. So now that the bike does the speeds that I wanted it to do, it keeps me in those areas where I want to be, where my riding experience gets to be enhanced. And it makes me part of the scenery, participating, as opposed to just riding by it. And it's got a carburetor on it, and that's a pain in the butt. But is it really? Or have we just gotten so used to convenience that we don't know how to deal with one anymore? There's people on the road today on motorcycles that have never owned a carbureted bike. There's carburation, because fuel injection has been around that long now. And while I'm not fond of multiple carburetors, powering multiple cylinders, I do have a fondness for a single carburetor with a twin or a single cylinder, just due to simplicity. It's the kind of thing that will stick around a long time. And it's something that I can work on, because it's essentially powered by gravity, wind, passing through a miniature toilet tank, and I can maintain the thing with just a screwdriver. And I can't do that with fuel injection, because you've got multiple sensors, relays, a fuel pump, fuel line junctions all over the place, and fuel injectors. And the thing about electronics is they can just quit working out of the blue. And this is what that looks like.
Seems we got ourselves a little problem here.
But I make no arguments that carburetors are better than fuel injection. Fuel injection is much more convenient, higher performance. So if that's your thing, fuel injection is fine for you. But me, I was looking for longevity. I want durability and simplicity over time is what I'm looking for. So yeah, I've had to fiddle with the jets, and yeah, I got to turn on the fuel, apply some choke, get it started and nursed to life in the morning, and I have to stand there and wait for it to warm up, things like that. And that's just part of the price I pay for having that system on my bike, and I appreciate it. And I don't try to rush it or anything like that. I don't look at it as any more inconvenient than me having to wind my watch in the morning, or wait for water to get hot so I can make coffee, or wait for my wife to get ready to go anywhere, really. So that little ritual I have to do with the bike is something that I enjoy. It's something I look forward to. And I think over time, you realize that that's the kind of thing that's missing from today's motorcycling world, where everything's about instant gratification, where I'm kind of more about that slow burn satisfaction. So I embrace the carburetor, and I get satisfaction in knowing that the bike can do its thing because I've done mine. And it's got a Chinese engine. If it does its job, who cares? That's all I'm worried about. And there's a more nuanced conversation to be had about it, other than just calling it a Honda clone, similar to what you can buy on Amazon or eBay. A little more to it than that. And all this engine needs to do is just keep running. That's it. I don't need performance out of this thing, at hyper levels or anything like that. I just need it to run like a sewing machine and keep on ticking. I've had the Honda Super Cub and the Honda Monkey, and I've been in those engines as well as this one, and I'll tell you now, I'd rather have this one every day of the week and twice on Sunday as opposed to those two. Because I think that engine's a little bit weak. And I don't mean power-wise, I mean construction-wise. Just because I've been in there and looked at things and had things go wrong and I've fixed them and things like that. I'd much rather have this one. I think this is much more robust than even today's little Honda engine. And somebody left me a comment that was meant to be an insult. And I'll post a screenshot of it here. So they're asking, why, can you imagine having a Chinese engine that's used as a water pump on farms? Yes I can. And that's exactly what I want. Something that's going to run, like I said, like a sewing machine, just keep on trucking. That's all I want it to do. Plus, even in a worst case scenario, I'll never face a big repair bill with this engine, because the cost of replacing one of these costs less than just a service on a lot of modern bikes today. And it's got a little bitty fuel tank. That means it's got a short fuel range. And that was a concern that I had going into this purchase. You know, because I was coming off of like my Himalayan, which had almost 400 miles of range, where this one, you know, erring to the safe side, I've got about 120. With my auxiliary, I've got about 150 miles worth of range out of this one. But that's the same range I get out of my Continental GT. So it hasn't been an actual issue. In fact, I've never had to use my auxiliary fuel bottles. So I'm kind of carrying dead weight, you know, with that. And so what I do is I pair that with my navigation, where I don't have a phone mount on the handlebars. So in order for me to look at a map or anything like that, just like I do when I have to buy fuel, I have to stop and get off the bike and buy the fuel or look at my map and things like that. And so that gets me out of the saddle for a second. You know, and it keeps me fresher over time as opposed to just putting the hammer down and trying to cover miles. So it kind of, once again, it enhances the riding experience because I'm fresher in the saddle. Plus, I'm keeping my mind occupied with where I'm going and looking for road signs and things like that, as opposed to just following an arrow or a line, you know, on a screen on my dashboard. So the fuel range has actually been a positive, in my opinion. I didn't think it would be. And I didn't think of it in that manner until I started actually riding the bike and realizing what was happening, you know, as kind of a side effect of me, you know, having short fuel range is me getting off the bike. And the same goes for navigating with my maps. I just navigate, instead of picking my destination from the start and traveling on that line and hoping I find fuel along the way. What I do is I start at my starting point and I know the general direction of where I'm going. So I look for fuel stations, you know, in that general vicinity, and I might not take that main road. I might be off to the one side, going to that fuel station. Once I get there, fill up, and then do it again. What's the next fuel station? Find that one. It might be over here. I go that way. And so I take kind of a meandering route to get where I'm going. And I just stumble across, you know, just gorgeous little towns and find waterfalls and things like that. And it's just, like I said, that helps elevate my riding experience, you know, even more. And so having that, you know, like I said, that short fuel range and looking at the maps, getting on and off the bike, you know, it keeps me fresh and keeps me from getting exhaustipated. And it's got a hardtail. That must be hell on my back and my tailbone. And that's not the case. It's actually better than I thought it would be. I wasn't in the market for a hardtail. Like I said, I originally was planning on getting the Griffin, but the seat option on this swung me towards this bike because I have a similar saddle on my bicycles. I always buy Brooks saddles for my bikes because they're comfortable as hell. And I even ride it kind of like a bicycle. If you ever, pretty much all of us, you have ridden hardtail rigid bicycles, and you know when you're in the saddle, you're pedaling along and there's bumps or anything coming, you get up out of the saddle, use your legs as suspension, and once you're through the rough stuff, you sit back down. That's exactly what I do on this bike. So people have seen me take it like off-road and things like that, and you can see me get up out of the saddle, let the bike move beneath me as I'm using my legs as the suspension of the bike, get through the rougher parts and sit down and continue on. I mean, that's how they did it in World War II when this was, you know, the bike, kind of bike everybody rode at that time. Now, the rear wheel can hop at high enough speeds if you hit bumps and things like that. So you got to kind of keep an eye out for that sort of thing. So I'm constantly scanning the road for imperfections. You know, like I said, with my navigation, where I'm thinking about the route and keeping an eye out for my turns and things like that, I'm also watching the road. And so this keeps me more alert instead of my mind just wandering off in la-la land, you know, while I'm cruising down the road. So I'm constantly paying attention to what's going on. And so the hardtail, like I said, it has me paying more attention. So it, once again, that turns into a plus, a positive, you know, for the hardtail. And it's something I think a lot of people actually overlook when they think about this sort of thing. So if you think you're just going to jump on one of these and just go ride it like you stole it, you better be paying attention to what you're doing because you'll get your salad tossed right quick and in a hurry if you're not. And like I said, it's surprisingly more comfortable than you would think. And it's got a pretty large rider cockpit. Even when I go from this bike to my GT, I feel kind of cramped up. As soon as I get on my GT, I have to acclimatize a little bit. And the suspension seems to make no difference. The saddle and the springs on the saddle, keep things under control. And I had my Honda Super Cub. I took a 4-hour trip on that thing. And I took just a porn star level ass pounding from that bike to the point that I was seriously considering just abandoning the thing on the side of the road. Where this thing, I took it on a 1,300 mile road trip, and on day one I spent 12 hours in the saddle on this bike, and I was absolutely fine. So just having or not having suspension in the rear doesn't automatically equate to more comfortable bike. Doesn't work that way. Oh, but they're so expensive. Actually, I wasn't put off on the price of the bike, because just comparing this bike with other bikes in its price range or other bikes of its engine capacity actually reveals very little useful information. Because this is kind of the motorcycling world's equivalent of somebody buying a Morgan or Pemberton car. Sure, the Miata costs less money and probably a better car overall, but the people who buy Morgans and Pembertons, buy them for a reason. It's due to the entire experience you get owning that car and driving that car. And there's no difference here. This bike is about the experience and what you get out of it riding it. And I get an absolute ton out of this bike. And if that's not for you, that's not for you. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. Just telling you my experience with this bike. So for me, all the drawbacks and things that we've talked about with this bike, and how I've kind of turned them all on their head and made them into positive experiences, is why I've developed a bond with this bike. Just man and machine. And that's why I like it more today than I did a year ago when I bought it. My affection for this bike has grown over time. I didn't realize that until somebody actually approached me and just walked up and said, "Hey, how do you like that?" Because that's a question I don't get asked. Usually everybody asks, what year is it, or did I restore it, something along those lines. But somebody walks up and said, "How do you like that?" And I hadn't been asked that before. And so I had to think about it for a second. And I told him, I like it more today than I did when I bought it. And so that is what's making this a bike that I will never sell or trade for another bike. This bike has gone beyond keeper status, and it's now an heirloom level item. So do I think this bike is perfect and I think everybody should go out and buy one? No, it's not the perfect bike for everybody. It's not a perfect bike. It's got plenty of flaws. But when I find flaws, I try to find the bright side to them and use them to my advantage. And in a promotional video, it was early in the production of these, one of the founders of Janus said something, and I think he was absolutely right.
It's really kind of counterintuitive to start a small displacement motorcycle manufacturing company up in America. But there's a huge need for people who don't want big bikes. They don't want fast bikes. They want something that's beautiful, something that gives a riding experience unlike anything else you can buy out there. And I feel like at Janus, that's what we provide.
And here goes the bike. I have no idea what that was. Most modern bikes look like insects to me, so I can't identify them anymore. And we got more traffic coming. So that gives me another break out of the saddle. And we got another car going by. I wasn't necessarily looking for I was looking to buy a bike besides weight. For virtually anything else, Fucking cars.